Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We are positively, at least for the next couple of days here, through our pumpkin pie and Thanksgiving. And my wife and I are staying home alone. I just want to point that out. I hope folks aren't gathering. I hope we can do something about this virus in our country. So I just want to make my little public service announcement there for everyone to stay as safe as possible here. I'm not going to Pittsburgh on Thursday night. Luke, I'd rather be up there having a good time. I know you went to the game on Sunday. We're going to talk about offense and defense and decision-making and tackling, and we can get into all of that. Before I do, though, I want to go back before the game because you were witness to something that only a handful of folks were. You were there in the beginning of whatever the Harbaugh thing at the center. I don't know what that is in Camp Harbaugh, and I know we all watched John's brother struggle on Saturday as well against Rutgers. What was that? Was it noticeable to you as to whatever that was, or was that something not everybody in the press box noticed?
I think most people noticed it. I'll say this. I remember last year for the playoff game that Tennessee did the same thing when they came out from the tunnel. And from what I understand, and look, I'm not a Tennessee Titans fan. I'm not someone who follows them closely other than when the Ravens are playing them. But from what I understand, this is something they have done, not just to the Ravens, but it's something they do. They kind of run towards midfield, and I don't know if they do a little huddle, little spiel, a little chant, whatever it is.
That feels a little collegiate, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean,
doesn't it? A little bit.
And I will say, I meant to go back and look for it, but I do recall when they did that back in January, I tweeted something to the idea of, I'm guessing that's not going to sit too well with the Ravens, especially when they've talked up the shield. They brought it back at midfield, the Ravens shield that for a number of years they took away from their field. But I think it's something they've done before. They did it on Sunday, and John Harbaugh didn't like it. And at that point, this was as the Ravens were getting ready to be introduced, which, they do these pregame introductions for no one, which is just strange, but that's another, that's an aside at this point. But Harbaugh clearly was jawing with some players. It looked like Malcolm Butler was kind of in the middle of this. And then I assume Mike Vrabel saw that happening. So then he came out and he and Harbaugh started jawing. I think, frankly, if I'm being really blunt, I think it's dumb.
Yeah. I agree.
It's just, I think there are certainly scenarios where I can understand a coach getting kicked off at the other team or the other coach. If there's a cheap shot scenario, guys that are being hit illegally, things of that nature. But this machismo over a painted Raven shield at midfield, it just
play the game.
It was odd. It was definitely odd. And I'll say this, maybe John Harbaugh was doing this with the thought that his team would be fired up. Well, you saw how the defense played on the opening drive of the game, after the offense punted the ball. I mean, they were lifeless at the beginning. So, if it was something John Harbaugh did to be strategic, it didn't work because they did not start that game very well. So,
is it weird being there when it's so lifeless there? Because I haven't been yet. For me, watching on TV, I think the really weird part, because on Sunday I'm really paying attention all day long, and how the cheering isn't the same as being there. Like when the Ravens failed, there was a period where I tweeted the fans would be booing the Ravens offense right now. Yep. They're not. And Lamar's walking off the field with the chin strap feeling like they are getting booed, but I know they're not getting booed. And I'm watching it on TV and they're not getting booed. And it's just sort of this random sound from some NBC broadcast in 1984. It sounds like the sound behind Dick Enberg or something. I do remember the announcerless game, by the way. I remember that one from the 1982 season, 83 season, whatever it was. But I'm thinking every part of it looks and feels off, and the sound's a little off at home. And I'm thinking the real sound there is a Pop Warner game and the sound of them mouthing off to each other. The only sound that is available there is FU, FU. And it's pretty obvious that Malcolm Butler was FUing John Harbaugh, and it's probably pretty obvious that everybody in the stadium heard it and saw it. And it's a different kind of thing when John Harbaugh's at the 50-yard line ready to fight the whole Titans franchise, and there's nobody in the stands except paper cutouts and a Mo Gabba section. Like, it's just, there's something really surreal about it. I'm thinking, if I'm you, because I didn't see it like you did. I saw it on friggin' Twitter. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, and it's funny you mentioned that. We didn't hear it from the press box because we're behind glass, and you don't really hear a whole lot behind the press box. I mean, even when there's 71,000 fans screaming, you don't hear that in the same way that everyone else does.
Look, it's one thing if it's Braveheart and you're out there and it's 70,000 people, and I think it's a whole different thing when you're a grown man who's made $100 million coaching football, when you're out there yelling at each other before a game for TV and cutouts. And, like, I don't know, man. I mean, all of it's just really, really weird. Like, I started to think about, the guy running the country right now and how WWE, the whole campaign, all of the red and all of that. And then how it, like, becomes this thing we see before the game with grown men before a football game. And I just think it would be even more surreal watching it in an empty gladiatorial purple pit. That's all. I mean, I thought it was a little, it's just strange. That's all. I'll leave it at that. Strange.
Yeah, no, it is strange. And again, to come back to that specific pregame incident, I think most people in the press box picked up on it, or at least the latter part of it. But what was strange was when John Harbaugh started basically going out there, I assume, and he, of course, he didn't want to touch it after postgame, and that's probably the right decision from his perspective. But the Ravens weren't out there yet. So it's kind of like, John, your players aren't out there yet. I mean, they're getting ready to come out of the tunnel. So it was strange. It's very weird. Keep in mind, this was the first game that they've played since the Cleveland game at home, where they didn't even have the friends and family. Remember, for the Kansas City game, that was when they at least allowed, what was it, the 250 family members, people that lived in, players and coaches.
That's the week I texted Costa and asked him if I could move in. Yeah.
So,
but I'm okay not being there now. It's kind of weird,
and that's fine. Right. But it is strange because even for those 250 fan games, even for, we talked about this after the Pittsburgh game, albeit with a losing result, having 4,000 fans, how much of a difference it made. The weirdest part for me, and I said this during the Cleveland game, and you've probably felt this, I guess, when you went to Houston and there were no fans there.
And DC.
When the opposing team comes out of the tunnel, and whether it's the Steelers or whatever team you have the least feeling animosity toward in the NFL, there's always when they run out of the tunnel, there's at least a smattering of boos, right? At the very least. But think about this. This is the Tennessee Titans, who in January came into Baltimore and beat the best regular season team in Ravens history, bar none. 14-2, best point differential the NFL's seen in 13 years, 12 years, whatever it was. A team that hadn't lost in September. And the Tennessee Titans were coming back into town for a rematch of that game. And when they ran out of the tunnel, there was no reaction. It was quiet. And that's just very weird. Now, that's not an excuse for the Ravens, because all 32 teams are dealing with this.
So much of the game is emotion. It really is.
Yeah, I mean, but it's not as though the Ravens are at a disadvantage of that compared to other teams. And I'm sorry, some people will say, well, some of these teams have fans still. These stadiums are not. I mean, I can tell you, I said that it made a difference for the Ravens-Steelers game, but it was 4,000 people. It's not. I mean, they're not forcing a timeout or a delay a game or anything like that.
I'm telling you, when I came back from Philadelphia, I ran into Ravens fans up at the Joe Biden Plaza in Delaware. We're all wearing our masks. And, the only mask I own, I learned, are purple and Ravens. So I'm sitting in the press box wearing a Ravens mask. It's the only mask I had. So I'm up in Philadelphia, and on the way home, I felt sorry for the fans that went. That's kind of the weirdness to me, is like sitting all alone in an empty section with no one to high five and looking around and the surreal sounds of sort of some noise, but not. I don't know. I've quacked out on this, other than it's TV theater now, and I'm living vicariously through you, Luke.
Yeah, I mean, it's made for TV, and that's why when I share these observations or these experiences, it's not. It's not in any way suggesting, sympathy or anything like that. I mean, blessed to be in the ballpark and in the press box and being able to cover the game and provide that perspective. But it's a made-for-TV event at this point. I mean, that's what it is, especially now, not even having the 4,000 people like they had for the Pittsburgh game. But at the same time, you've got to overcome that as a football team. You've got to bring your own energy. As I mentioned, for all the Twitter videos and talk and discussion about Harbaugh against Malcolm Butler, Harbaugh against Mike Vrabel, it sure as heck didn't give the Ravens any spark at the beginning of the game because, well, the offense goes 3 and out, and then Tennessee goes 9 plays, 79 yards, and 5 minutes 16 for a touchdown. So they clearly didn't get any emotional lift from that. And I'm not saying John Harbaugh did that deliberately or not, or John just had an emotional reaction, but it was one of those things that I thought was silly, and I don't think it's a big deal in the big picture. I'm not saying
I don't think it's silly if Ray Lewis and Ed Reed and Terrell Suggs are out there with you and like behind you and saying, yeah. I don't know what he would have said, which is get off the field, you clowns, or like I'm trying to think of what John might have said.
Probably like that's our shield.
Get off the field,
you always
you clown. Like I can hear John saying that, show some respect. You know what I mean? I can hear John saying that. I don't know that the first thing would have been, maybe John would have said, get off our effing field. I don't, maybe something along those lines, but I'm wondering.
Probably along those lines.
Okay, fair enough. So get off our effing shield, whatever. And then they say something back, and I'm thinking, all right, what possessed that? Where is that? Where's everybody behind you? Do they feel the way you feel in an empty stadium before the game? And I don't know.
That was the problem. The players hadn't come out yet. That's kind of the problem. It's like you're going.
So it really was Braveheart. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, they hadn't come out yet. So, and look, that's where I don't think John Harbaugh was going to get in a fist fight with anyone or anything like that. But if it had come to that, if some player's a loose cannon.
Well, Lamar after the game said like he didn't know about it.
He didn't even know about it.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it was weird. I mean, again, is it a
big?
And
I love John, and I love all of that, and I like.
Sure.
There's a lot of me in that, right? I mean, as a person to some degree, but
what this reminds me of, I mean, this goes back to the Cowboys and the 49ers way back when Terrell Owens went and stood on the star and danced, and what was it, George Teague, the Cowboy safety, decked him. I mean, that's what I kind of think of. You're right, it does seem like more of a college kind of thing, but that's what I think of in terms of when something like that happens in the NFL. But like I said, from what I had understood, the Titans just do that. I'm sure they would say that it's not meant to disrespect someone's logo at midfield, and they're just gathering at midfield to get hyped, but it could certainly be interpreted that way. Either way, it's babyish. Get over it. It's fine. No one's getting hurt over this.
But I think it's worth discussing from a leadership, and I'll keep going back to leadership. And look, I know that right now I will be the first one to admit in the aftermath of all of this where I wake up, Monday morning and I'm glad I don't take phone calls. Like literally, like I just don't think I could sit here for 4 hours and listen to people bitch about the coaching and the play calling and Lamar.
There's a lot to complain about, though.
I think there's plenty to complain about, but I just don't think they're good enough as constructed right now because of the injuries, because of the law. They're just not good enough. And in a lot of ways, and I think that will be borne out on Thursday night.
Nashville would have been saying the same thing right now if the Ravens had beaten them. So,
dude, I'm the last guy to make excuses, but when they're not good enough right now, and I am asking questions about where the heart is and where the leadership is to say where are the guys you're going to go fight in Pittsburgh with on Thursday night, and who's going to step up. And this is a week not to check their talent or their scheme or their game plan. We always know how sloppy Thursday night is to begin with, right? This is how beaten up they are at this point, mentally, physically, on the scoreboard, off the scoreboard, and whether they are going to go out to the 50-yard line with a middle finger the way John Harbaugh did on Sunday morning. You know what I mean? Like, I want to see a little bit of that against Pittsburgh on Thursday night to some degree. Even if they get their ass kicked, they don't want to get their ass kicked. You know what I mean?
Sure. I'd much rather see not going 1 for 4 inside the red zone. I'd much rather see the pre-snap penalty stop. I'd much rather see better tackling in the fourth quarter and overtime more so than the extracurriculars.
Well, that speaks to getting their ass kicked then, right? I mean,
sure.
Yeah.
But like I said, I mean, look, they've had some injuries. There's no question about that. And we've talked about that. And we've talked about the merits of their Super Bowl chances without Ronnie Stanley. And now throw Nick Boyle in there and what that means. And, we saw Mark Andrews play a much higher percentage of snaps. We saw Luke Wilson, who was just signed off the street, former Seahawks tight end. He's been around, but, how much of an impact is he going to have? Yeah, he's a blocking tight end, but he's not Nick Boyle. We'll see Patrick Ricard do some different things, but you really do lose your identity. But so much of what I mentioned, I do wonder about the preparation and the game plan. And I mean, how many weeks in a row? I guess to their credit, correct me if I'm wrong, this is the first time in like 4 weeks they didn't have a pre-snap illegal formation penalty at least. Those are inexcusable things that keep happening. You can't have these pre-snap penalties. You can't have that. Those are things losing teams do, quite frankly. And those are things that they avoided doing last year. Not that they're perfect, but they didn't do that very often. This year, it killed them on back-to-back drives, a false start in a critical spot, the last 2 drives of regulation. So those are the things that are really frustrating, and those are the things you can control more so than understanding that Ronnie Stanley's got a torn-up ankle right now and you're not going to get him back to the spring. You can't do anything about that, but you can line up correctly. You can, especially in an empty stadium, not jump early and commit a false start.
And know your alignment, know your assignment.
Sure,
and then if you get beaten because, TJ Watt beats you, well, then TJ Watt's supposed to beat you if you're Luke Wilson, I guess, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are things out of their control that absolutely have stunted their ceiling. Now, what their ceiling is at this point, I still think this team's going to ultimately make the playoffs. I still believe that. I don't know if they're going to win a playoff game. I certainly am not confident that they can make a deep January run because they frankly just they come up against these good teams and they haven't gotten the job done. So why is that going to change come January? But again, there's a lot of football between now and then. There were people, including many people like us even, that were ready to throw dirt on this team in 2012 when they lost 3 in a row and fired Cam Cameron and Joe Flacco does the faceplant. And we're still a few weeks away from that point in the season. So you never know. But it's just not trending in a good direction. And I will say this, and this goes back to some of what you've said. And you know me, Nestor. I try to be someone that's based in numbers and reality and evidence and not
as opposed to me who's just a homer.
No, but and not to use those same talking points, but I'll be honest with you at this point, and I don't mean this in terms of questioning anyone's manhood, quote unquote. I do question this team's mental toughness at this point because I look at how last year went, and they did so well, and they were barely even challenged in the second half of the season, and they were ahead, and they were ahead by a lot, and they were able to play downhill, and they were able to impose their will on the opposition. And this year, it's not coming as easily, and I'm not seeing them handle that very well. I'm not seeing them able to finish games. I'm not seeing them able to, quite frankly, I use this analogy talking to just one of my friends on Sunday night. They kind of at this point, they feel like the heavyweight that had a massive punch, had a great record, and then gets exposed for having a little bit of a glass jaw, and suddenly you realize this guy can't take a punch. Are the Ravens that team? It's feeling that way. And now, again, factor in the injuries, factor in the weirdness of this season and whatever else you can find plenty of excuses if you want to. If you want to live in that world, you can blame injuries, you can blame officiating, all that. And you see all that, and I get it. Every team and every fan base does that. I mean, that's part of what makes this fun, right? But I do question the mental toughness of this team to handle adversity and, frankly, when the other team punches you, to counter that, to bounce back, to come from behind. And look, we made such a big deal about what they did in Indianapolis. I mean, they were down 3 points at halftime. If that's truly a big deal, well, We've seen how the 2 games have gone since then. So
dude,
it clearly
as much
wasn't
as
a breakthrough.
we're killing them, they had a lead in the second half. I mean, like we're a different animal here. If they just finish a drive, if Lamar gets an inch on that second down play that doesn't
how about you tackle AJ Brown?
How about any of that?
I mean,
any of the above, literally.
I mean,
right?
we haven't, we've mentioned the tackling and passing, but what was that? I mean, seriously, you look at that. What? Chuck Clark, Marcus Peters, Marlon Humphrey, and then
Queen gets run
Patrick
over.
Queen looked like he was escorting A.J. Brown to the end zone. And I know A.J. Brown had someone pushing him from behind, and, that was a good play by his teammate. I can't remember who it was off the top of my head. But, I mean, what is that? And this was a defense that after that ugly opening drive where Tennessee marched right down the field, the defense played pretty darn well for the rest of the first quarter, second quarter, and well into the third quarter. And then the fourth quarter, they forgot how to tackle. And look, I mean, Derrick Henry was going to get some of his, and even in overtime, he busts the run. Derek Wolfe missed the tackle, but I keep coming back to that A.J. Brown play. And you know what that reminded me of? Reminded me of Antonio Brown in Pittsburgh on Christmas Day in 2016. And it reminded me of Tyler Boyd against the Ravens at the end of 2017.
Backbreaker.
Right, not the same stakes as those, but
Sure.
It felt like that kind of play. Like, how did you just let that happen? And it did. And the game went into overtime. And, well, this team's now 6-4, and they have a heck of a challenge on their plate this week along, pushing aside the turkey and mashed potatoes.
Well, I'm not going to wreck anybody's Thanksgiving around here because we're going to be serving up to Hark ice cream. I brought the whole box in. I don't know if you can see the bus comes, the truck comes, the ice cream comes, the chocolate love comes, the eggnog. Luke, they snuck me the sweet potato casserole, and my wife got into it before I did. I fall asleep at 7 o'clock every night because I'm old. She got into it in the morning. She's like, look, get a mouthful of it when you get your cup of Royal Farms. And I had a mouthful that whatever you do, add the sweet potato to the order. Also, the eggnog, the peppermint bark. I've got the salted caramel apple crisp butter thing going on as well. To Harker, we're going to save you $15.70. We're going to deliver it beginning on Black Friday. It's one click away. It comes right to your door. If you love what we do here at WNST.net, we're trying to make this transition to Baltimore positive. Nothing more positive than having really good ice cream while you're shut in during the holidays from our friends at the Hark. We'll be telling you more about that later on in the week. Luke will be around Owings Mills. I am not going to Pittsburgh. Luke is not going to Pittsburgh. I'm going back to my couch with my cat to watch the Ravens play the Steelers on Thursday. Don Moeller and I are going to talk about fixing the city, some gratitude stories, holiday stories, uplifting stories, all available at the new BaltimorePositive.com.